Hello, everybody. Welcome back for a brand new episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live. This is your host, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah, and we are back in the United Kingdom for the second consecutive episode. And we have a special guest, the lovely Miss Lavinya Stennett, founder, CEO of the Black Curriculum. And she's been doing a lot of groundbreaking work in the UK to try to incorporate Black history, Black British history into the academic curriculum. So we're going to talk about her journey to this venture, as well as some of the other pertinent issues that are taking place in schools throughout the United Kingdom. So welcome, Lavinya, to the show.
Thank you, Kwame.
So the first question I'd like to ask my guests is to just tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you into education in the first place.
Yeah, so my name is Lavinya. I recently completed a degree from SOAS University, which is a university in London called SOAS, and my degree was in Development and African Studies. And for me, that was my first entrance point into Black history. It was my first entrance point into discussions around colonialism and imperialism in a very honest context. And I say honest context in the sense where we were not measured by the weight of our knowledge, but rather the personal insights that we had. And I think because of that, I was given an opportunity to really express myself. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, gave me the inspiration, or I think that was one main factor that gave me the inspiration to start the Black Curriculum, which was founded last year, June. And essentially, it's an initiative that goes into schools to teach Black history all year round. Because currently the national curriculum, which is the curriculum that guides secondary and primary schools for young people aged 5 to 16, it doesn't center Black history at all. The only kind of Black history you would read is about slavery, or if you're lucky, Martin Luther King, Mary Seacole, or Malcolm X. So for me, that was like my first entrance point, and I just felt that we had to do something about it. So a little bit about me again.
Awesome. So I know in the UK, the fight to incorporate Black history into different schools is very similar to what's going on back in the United States. So I wanted to ask you, as you were creating the Black curriculum with your team, did you reference any education systems in other parts of the country in order to get a sense of what that would look like in the UK context?
So initially, I did put in a grant application to look at South Africa, because they have a strong history of apartheid, which I felt would serve as like an impetus to really push for Black history. But I understand that the global structure as it exists completely erases Black history no matter what country you're in. And I think that clicked for me when I'd done a study abroad in New Zealand, because there I was exposed to Maori history. Maoris are the indigenous people of New Zealand, and it's the same context. They're indigenous kind of like lived experience is completely erased, and then the impact that colonialism had on their lived experience is also completely erased. And the only way that I was able to kind of be introduced to that was through the conversations that I had with my lecturers who were of Maori descent.
Okay.
And they would be openly honest with me and cry and, you know, share these very intimate feelings about what the legacy of colonialism has done. And so I kind of understood that if we're going to look for inspiration, we have to be able to reflect on the past before we go forward, because currently it's a very similar context. So for me, it was about grounding myself with people around the world who are thinking in the same way. Yeah.
Well, yep, in the spirit of Sankofa, look back at the past.
That's it.
In order to move forward. So that's very important. And I just find this interesting because as I was doing my research and just kind of reading up on just the state of education as it pertains to Black people in the UK, I just couldn't help but notice the similarities and the parallels between what's going on there and what's going on in the States. Because for many people, even Black people in the States, the perception is in parts of Europe, particularly in the UK, they seem to be more progressive, more receptive in terms of just the intermingling of races. So you see a lot more interracial relationships and different things, which would give you the impression that they're more progressive in their mindset, and the issues that we experience in the States don't happen there. So to hear your perspective on this is very interesting and informative. And I think the audience would be interested in learning more about that.
So I think what you're touching upon is the idea of multiculturalism.
Yes.
So we call that here in the UK, there's this introduction of, we're a multicultural society, respect and tolerance are at the forefront of our values,
Yes.
and it kind of gives the semblance that things are united on face value. But if we explore a little bit deeper, what we find is that people don't actually know anything about each other's history or the context as to how their entrance into the UK came about. And I think what that does, it gives us an illusion that things are progressive, and it kind of reduces the amount of interaction that we can have as humans. So I think within, especially like the European context, as you know, we're no longer in the EU because of Brexit, but in the European context of France, Spain, the UK, Germany, and so forth, there's a pattern of migrants coming to these countries, building these countries up, contributing to the economy, but a lack of respect and understanding of those communities, which is very much tied to the legacy of colonialism. And for me, it's like that, again, looking back to the past, it helps us to build a bigger picture of why we still don't see certain communities. When I say certain communities, I'm referring to Black and Asian and minority communities, why we still don't see those communities as significant contributors, or furthermore citizens of those countries. And so, yeah, I think what multiculturalism has done, it's given us a full sense of unity, but the undercurrents of that are still very much connected to colonialism and the treatment, the bad treatment of citizens of the British Empire. So for example, one of the recent, I guess, scandals, as they call it, is the Windrush. I'm not sure if you've heard about it, but basically, so basically British citizens who are of Jamaican descent, live here, have their families here, been schooled here, worked here in Britain, and then, have been sent back. And I think that kind of treatment doesn't add up to this multicultural understanding that we have.
So it's funny you mentioned the Wimmer Scandal. When I actually read about the Wimmer Scandal, it's very similar to what's going on in the United States as far as the treatment of not just Muslims, but even people of Mexican descent, Hispanic people, because you have a lot of that going on in the States where you have, President Trump, he's spewing out this racist rhetoric and having people who are in the country legally, like immigrants, go back to where they came from. It's like the same thing going on. And then when you think about this idea of multiculturalism, I think about just the States. We just had a Black president, Barack Obama. When he came into office, you heard all this talk about we are now a post-racial society. We are now in a place where we have a Black person who can be a president of the United States. That's unprecedented. But there's still that undercurrent, or in some cases, overcurrent of racism that takes place. I mean, they did everything in their power. Republicans did everything in their power to get him out of office. I mean, even Donald Trump asked him to submit a birth certificate to prove that he was an American citizen. When has that ever happened before in American history? So
Yeah.
once again, this is just another example of how the parallels are existing between UK and the US in terms of just how people of color are treated, particularly Black people. Now, I want to
I
go
think you've raised. Can I just quickly touch on that? Is that okay?
please.
Yeah, no, you've raised a really interesting point, and I think the parallel for us, we're having this discussion about racism a little bit more often in like the media and like national television, for example. But one of the things that I've noticed is that there is such a fragility surrounding that conversation, and I think that that reaction really exemplifies what the basis of these fears are.
Yeah.
And you know, yeah, it is race. Like race is constituted in our legal system, it's constituted in policies and ideologies, and like, you know, these are things that have I'd say like, yeah, acts and laws that have founded the basis of each of our societies. So it's like these parallels will show. The more that we start to make noise, you know, the more they will start to become uncovered. So yeah, it is an overcurrent rather than an undercurrent, and yeah, it's an issue. It's a mad issue. Yeah.
But I wanted to stay on the Wimmer scandal for a second, because when I did the research on the Wimmer scandal, it was very similar to what's going on with the Dreamers population in the United States. So in our schools, we have a population of students who are from families of immigrants, in some cases undocumented or legal immigrants, right? But they've been in the States their whole life. They've gone through the school system, got their degrees. Their parents are blue-collar citizens. They work hard to provide for their family. But because of all this racist rhetoric, they're now in situations where they're being forced to go back home with their families because of the status of their parents. So we're talking about first generation immigrants who are being mistreated and not having access to higher education because of the status of their parents. So with the Wimmer scandal, I'm wondering what type of impact has it had on the students of Caribbean descent in UK schools that you've either witnessed or have heard from maybe others?
That's a good question. I think what the impact of deportations and the wrongful treatment of people of Caribbean descent, particularly the Wimmer generation, have faced, it's kind of broken down this idea of Black Britishness. I think a lot more people are feeling uncomfortable with defining themselves as Black and British, because we've seen how easy it is to have your status revoked, to have your contributions deemed unnecessary, and how fickle the law really is, and your status as a human being is. And, you know, as you mentioned, like the kind of access to basic human rights, such as the free NHS here, like go through the NHS, and education, and these other kind of services that are available to you. And so I think what it has done, it's made a lot of people uncomfortable and question the kind of status we've taken for granted. And I think in some ways it's actually allowed more people to become a lot more comfortable in defining themselves as Black, because no one in the eyes of the law is inescapable. Particularly if you're Black, you have whiteness up against you, and that manifests in a number of ways. And so I think when people are seeing that these are people who are not even, you know, a couple years, 10 years older than them, and they're being separated from their children, they're being sent back, what that does to you, it makes you reflect on your role in society. If that can happen to my neighbour, that can surely happen to me. So I think what it's done is open up these conversations again, and it's made people a little bit more, critical of the British state and the kind of idea that we are here because of benevolence rather than, you know, because of the actual contributions that we've made. And it's honestly, without trying to fearmonger, what it has done is it's literally made a lot more people scared You know, you can do one thing, or if you didn't have to do one thing. You can literally just be sent back on the basis of your skin color. And I think those are very arbitrary lines to define citizenship. We kind of saw it in the case of Shamima Begum, who was an ISIS bride. But yeah, in context of, you know, Black people in the UK, I think it's just, yes, it's not a great situation, obviously. But I think sometimes those situations do make people reflect in a way that can make them a little bit more aware of how the world has worked and is working. So it has drawn the connection between the past and what we're experiencing now. Yeah. And I understand this is quite a critical view, but yeah, these are my people, these are the networks that I'm in, and the conversations that I'm constantly faced with. I haven't met one person who feels like this is a positive thing and that they've gained a superior sense of belonging in this space at all. So yeah.
So with the Black curriculum, when you're doing something that's as radical and as revolutionary as this venture, there's always going to be pushback from certain populations of people. So I guess my question is, as you've developed this organization and this new material, academic material, what's been the reception of the different schools where you introduced the curriculum to?
Yeah, so I'd say with the schools, they've been very, very receptive, because I think how our, and I say our network, how our network is based, or how people are introduced to our network, the lines are so clear that if you don't understand the message, you will not buy into the service that we're providing. If you do, then they will buy the service. So we're very lucky in that the people that we get are 110% committed. And so we find that when we go into schools, those teachers or those students are very interested. They have a lot of questions for us. We have a high percentage rate of like recall, so they want to, you know, be involved and have another workshop or consultancy again. But I think with the wider public, we're pushing back against a racist attitude, and that is such embedded within British society, so that we do get a lot of pushback from a number of people. I don't know if you saw a recent post in the BBC, but if you look at all the comments, you'll be able to garner like a sense of, you know, where our nation is really at, and that is a case of they feel. But yeah, you know, I don't even have to explain it. It's just the attitudes of whiteness is very reactive, very defensive. You know, when you're used to being at the center, and you know, the idea of being at the center is based on the exclusion of the contributions that Black people have had, and then those Black people start to actually question that that norm. It does evoke a lot of very visceral, very angry reactions from people. So I understand where it comes from, but it's interesting to see it unfold. Yeah.
And I mean, in the education world, there's always talk about this idea of students having agency over their learning experience. And it's a popular buzzword in education. Everybody's using this word. But how can you have
what word? Sorry.
student agency? So how can a student develop agency in their learning experience if they're not being told the whole truth about their own existence historically within their home country and where they're really from? How can they develop their own agency over that and really come to figure out who they are identity-wise as individuals? This can happen.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point you've raised, and like, agency is not encouraged in our education system. If agency was encouraged, then we wouldn't be paying 9K a year for education. We would have freedom of choice to do and explore our own kind of interests. And I don't think the way in which the education system has operated for the last couple hundred years, it's not designed to give everyone agency. It gives certain people agency, particularly within the UK, education is very elitist here, and you find that certain classes, particularly the middle and upper class, they benefit a lot from the education system, because agency is given in the sense of, if you're able to afford a certain school or afford a certain university, then you're given agency to then go into higher levels in the workforce and ultimately working in government and so forth. But if you're talking about the everyday person, the education system does not set us up for true agency, because we would start to question these structures and actually start to question why things are set up in a certain way. So I think like we're working against an outdated structure that ultimately has not improved the lives of many young people, and who are currently just giving their labor, giving their time, giving their lives to work, and not really think and understand the world around them. And I really kind of understood this when I was at SOAS, because I was able to go and do the semester abroad in New Zealand. Mm-hmm. But again, for the everyday person, is that opportunity available?
That's true.
No. Right. I got a scholarship to go, but I was only able to access that scholarship through one of my lecturers. To get to my lecturer, I had to pay 9K a year. I had to be in an elitist institution. I had to kind of market myself in a way where I was able to get that scholarship. So again, like, it's not, these opportunities are not available to everybody. And so I think that is the point that, the education system seeks to reinforce, is that, yes, freedom and the ability to think for oneself is only afforded to a certain type of person, and that person has to go through certain structures and succeed in those structures to get there. And it's not everyone benefits from that.
Awesome. I have a few more questions before we wrap up. One question about just this idea of the lack of Black representation in the teaching profession. I know it's a huge issue in the States. Last time I checked, only 2% of teachers in the United States are Black men. 2%. Only 2%. So I know with that statistic, that already tells me that there's a maintenance of a status quo. Because if you don't have teachers who look like me in your classrooms, who are going to tell the truth to the students about who they really are, that's just maintaining the agency that goes to the dominant population. It just maintains this hierarchy, this social and economical hierarchy that exists within our societies. And I also believe that it makes it even more difficult to further the mission of incorporating more Black history into our respective curriculums. Because the people who have that connection to it aren't the ones who are teaching it to the children. So do you believe that having more Black teachers in the UK system would help further your mission of the Black curriculum to incorporate Black history into schools?
Do you know what? That is a very good question. Yeah. And I appreciate that, because like, we have questions like this in the UK, but I don't think it's given the kind of authority or the same kind of priority as other questions, surrounding the education system, particularly around Black education. It's more to do with the curriculum, but we can only talk of a curriculum, and we can only talk of student experience when we identify who are the enablers of that, who are the teachers, who are the drivers, who are the forces behind that. And I think it's absolutely important that there are Black teachers behind this, particularly Black men, because again, there is a huge underrepresentation of Black men, specifically within secondary schools. I remember I had one, but I'm probably the anomaly. I don't know how many other people my age could say in my secondary school education I had a Black male teacher. However, I would say it's important to think about what kind of Black people were getting into these education educational fields, because not every Black person is the same, and I think sometimes we almost in the urgency to improve the system, and in the urgency to kind of like provide a solution, we kind of oversee the fact that there are lines of class, there are lines of gender also that we intersect with, and you know, within that there can be negative things that are reinforced. So for example, there could be a Black teacher who deserves to kind of establish and maintain the status quo simply due to their self-preservation within the educational field. So I think if we're talking about finding Black teachers, it needs to be done very carefully. I think we need to really understand you know, what they're coming in with. Thank you. What they're coming in with, and who are they here to serve? Is it themselves or the students? And I think if we're going to do this, it needs to have a more critical, more like nuanced approach. You know, because the adage goes, "Not all skin folk are kinfolk."
You didn't say a lot. I was just about to say that. You are psychic. You are psychic. Exactly. Took the words right out of my mouth. Because not all Black folks are the same. And we think about the fact that we are all victims of this whitewashed curriculum that we had to go through in our own experiences. There's some of us who figure it out later on in life that, oh, wow, I need to unlearn everything that I was taught during my grade school years. Some of us don't ever come to that epiphany of, oh, like, that doesn't sound right. Like, we don't question what's being taught to us. So I think that kind of goes back to our agency conversation. We just got to do more of that questioning, more critical thinking of what's being taught to us. And those are skills that we have to teach our students ultimately.
And it's a hard situation, because as practitioners, sometimes like because of the demands that are placed on you, because of the expectations that you are held to by external wider white society, you're not actually given that time to think. And I think with academics and people who are in the institution, they have that time. They have the time to perfect their thoughts, but do those thoughts necessarily translate into action? And I think sometimes that's the kind of like irony of being a practitioner and someone who's on the ground, is that you're constantly having to like work within both fields of thinking and actually implementing those thoughts. And so it's a lot of pressure, which is why I think we just need to like support each other, like in solidarity, but then also like practically, and stop being at war with each other and stop working in silos. Because if we was to unite again, like I think a lot of these issues that we're facing could have been solved very easily. So I'm getting very irate.
I sense that. I sense the anger and the frustration. But I think what you mentioned is part of being revolutionary. Part of being revolutionary is going against what's considered the status quo, going against what's considered the norm within studies. So we can be compliant and try to disrupt from within, but we're kind of at a place where we have to be bold in our approach, but smart at the same time, and really let people know that this is a very serious issue. I think for so many years we've been compliant, and then at the same time try to not sugarcoat the issue, but do it in a way that's gonna keep us safe. So it's like very conservative. So we're not in that place right now. We have to be a bit more bold and assertive in how we go about this issue. Don't do it this way, it's gonna persist.
110%.
Yes. I think I had one more question before we wrap up. So when you're trying to implement a new idea, in this case, Black British history into the UK curriculum, the first step obviously is to get the approval from the required entities, right? Whether it's the school system, school board, whichever body is responsible for making those decisions. But then the other part is making sure that it's being done with fidelity. It's one thing to implement some type of clause or law that, you know, for people to teach this history, but it's another thing to make sure that they're in compliance and that they are doing it with fidelity and that there are some guidelines in place to ensure that different schools are not just going through the motions. They're doing it because they truly believe in this idea of Black history. So I guess my question is, how do we ensure that school leaders and just schools in general are going to not only incorporate Black history into the curriculum, but also ensure that their teachers teach it with a sense of urgency and fidelity? How can we do that?
It's a hard situation because I think what we have is a situation where diversity and inclusion are very important topics that are, you know, running corporate spaces. They are constantly, you know, just reinforced week after week, but there's no kind of like meaning or action behind it. There's no like law or policy that holds people to account. And so I think it's the same with like, I think it's the same with any, for example, any crime. It's illegal to do X, Y, Z, and not only is it illegal, but you will be X, Y, Z if you do this, you know? And I think that's the approach we need to take, because people will not take this seriously. And we've seen this time after time after time, where we are introduced with like a new kind of like thing to do, and it's almost just like, tick it off, yep, done that. Or it's done with a sense of like, do you know what, I have to do this, let me not just get myself into trouble. And there's no enthusiasm, there's no interest behind it. So I think for us, it's about kind of introducing an attitude where, sorry, not only an attitude, but an attitude and a policy approach where it's mandatory, it's 100% mandatory for all schools in the UK. This is serious now, you know, to teach Black history. But then it's also an attitude, a cultural attitude, where it's your responsibility and your duty, a civic duty as a citizen of the, you know, the British state, to teach this. And I think that's the part that I want to see come, because I think that would allow more teachers to kind of like take it more seriously, because at the moment it's almost like, well, do you know what? And kind of to just draw some context, the British education system is so fractured. So you have like independent schools, you have state schools, and you have private schools. And there's no kind of like regulatory body that oversees all these schools. You have state schools, which were previously like maintained by the state and local councils, now being turned into academies, so kind of smaller businesses.
Oh,
and what you have now, yes, yeah. So they're maintained by like, you know, a specific set of people, and it's a business. So there's no kind of like overarching principle guided by like the national curriculum that says all schools have to do it, because academies don't have to. So again, it has to come back down to a wider, it's very difficult. And probably I'm, you know, I'm hopeful. I mean, sometimes, you know, it kind of does sound very far-fetched, but you have to kind of think outside of like what currently exists to get the answers that you need, to get the results that you need. But for me, I really do believe it's possible to have something that guides teachers to be able to kind of push for this, whether or not they're Black or, you know, or they're white. There's something that allows them to kind of like entrench this as policy, you know. So for us, it's getting it into the national curriculum, but then going further to say that it needs to be examinable. So the exam specifications. So for example, there's like maybe 3 main bodies: Excel, AQA, OCR, that like mark all the exams of all the kind of like statutory things that young people have to learn, so like history, maths. So if we can get into that side of stuff, to say that the specifications within those exam boards have Black history listed in each of the subjects, then it'll make it easier for us to work backwards to say, well, if it's on the exam boards, then young people need to be learning it. So I think for me, it's about policy and getting it in at that end, but also kind of doing the work to kind of build teachers up to get to that point. So yeah, we've got a long way to go.
Absolutely. It's going to be the same type of battle in the U.S. But wow, I mean, this is a conversation that deserves more time, and I really hope that people, particularly those who are in positions of power, who can create policies, are listening.
Yes.
Because we need more conversation, more dialogue around this issue. It's been going on too long. It has to stop. And on that note, I think it's a good place to end this conversation.
Awesome.
Thank you, Lavinya, for taking the time to talk to us. Personally,
Welcome.
I appreciate and I commend you for taking this on. You're inspiring a lot of people, including myself, to do more. Because we need people. We need more people like you out there just disrupting status quo. We need more people doing that. And for you to do what you're doing, which is very much a grassroots effort in many ways, that's just inspiring, and it's just appropriate given that it is International Women's Month. So
Hey, and International Women's Day. Amazing, honestly.
Yeah, exactly.
Honestly, and I think one point that I would just want to lastly reinforce, like through history, nothing has operated by itself. Like we have all, whether or not we are physically together, but in the same mindset. And I don't want to put a definition to that mindset, but in the same mindset of liberation, we are actively going to make a change. And I think it's about kind of like working in our different corners, but being connected in what we're doing. So I think like what we've done today is like very inspirational, and I think it's going to set the groundwork for like change. And you know, like, let's just be honest, it's not going to be any easier, but I do believe that we will get the results that we want. So I'm hopeful, and yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity.
No problem. And before we wrap up, if you could just share with people information about the Black curriculum, the website, social media handles, so that they can follow all the great work you're doing and support you all.
Cool. So yeah, our main point of contact is the website. So the website is the Black Curriculum. Our Twitter, Instagram is the Black Curriculum as well. Facebook and LinkedIn is also the Black Curriculum, and then Twitter is Curriculum Black. We're soon to get the Black Curriculum one day. But if you want to get in contact with us to kind of find out how you can get involved, how you can support our work, do get in touch via our website. So if you go to the support or get involved page, then you can like get in contact with us. And also, I would encourage everyone to kind of like petition their influences, because I think this conversation needs to happen at a wider level. So if we can get people who have mass influence to kind of pick up the word and spread the word, then you know, at them, at the Black Curriculum, and get the conversation going.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And on that note, on behalf of Lavinya Stennett, this is Kwame Sarfo-Mensah signing off. So wherever you are in the world, want to wish you a good morning, good afternoon, good night, and we're going to do this again another time. All right, peace.
Definitely.